All right, welcome to a financial planning podcast with a down-to-earth vibe. Sasquatch listens while curling his hair. On this episode, we will discuss the Secure Act 2.0. So there have been updates to the Secure Act, and this may affect your retirement plans, including increased RMD age, catch-up contributions, 529 changes, Roth contributions by employers, auto-enrollment on new 401k plans. So let's answer those questions and go over it in detail on this episode of Through the Pines, introducing Forbes Best in State Wealth Management Teams for Utah. Also, Advisor Hub, fastest growing advisors to watch under 1 billion, and the receivers of the Ameriprise Client Experience Award. There are financial wizards for this episode of Through the Pines, Brandon Smith and Rex Baxter. How are you, gentlemen?
Good.
Doing great. Thanks for having us, Brandon.
So is this topic going to be as exciting as we make it, or is it really people are like, what is going on? Like they're worried about the Secure Act, or maybe they don't know, and here's what they should know.
Oh, I think people are lining up at the door to read the 350 pages of the Secure Act that Biden signed into law on December 29th.
Lining up the door. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I don't know much about it. So would it affect me if I'm not retired? So let's just start with that first basic question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Well, I guess I should say it depends.
Okay. Everything depends, right?
No, I think all of it is important to have, to have familiarity with, because some of it it depends on income. It depends on strategies. And so, yeah, I think it's important to kind of keep these topics, top of mind. And even if you're not in retirement, some of it, like the RMD one that I know we want to talk about, that impacts projected plans. So even if you're in your 50s or 60s today, that's going to impact how fast we're going to need to take distributions from our IRAs. So, yes.
Okay, let's chat about that. So increased RMD age. What is RMD? What does this mean? Break it down for us, Brandon.
Yeah, RMD is your required minimum distribution, and that's required on all of your assets that are pre-tax. So that's going to include your traditional IRAs, your traditional 401ks, SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, basically anything that you haven't paid taxes on yet, right? Because when we contribute to a traditional 401k, traditional IRA, we get a tax deduction. It goes in, pre-tax, and it grows tax deferred. But eventually the government wants their money, right? And so what they do is once you reach a certain age, they require that you take a portion of that out each year. And as you take that out, you're required to pay taxes on it.
Okay. So why did they change it? They're not getting the money fast enough?
Most legislation, it seems that way, right? It's like there's always something, right? Incentivize Roth or incentivize something so they can get the payment faster. And there's definitely some of that in this new legislation. However, the RMD rule, they're actually making it more favorable for the consumer. They're pushing back that age. So Before Secure Act 1.0, it was 70 and a half was the age limit. So once you turned 70 and a half, you had to start taking a percentage out. Usually starts around that 4% amount. And then Secure Act 1.0 happened. They didn't call it. It was just the Secure Act at that point. Secure Act happens, and then it pushed it back to a nice round 72. So not 70 and a half, but now 72. And then with this one, it's being pushed back to age 73 is when you needed to start taking. Now, one clarification, you can start pulling money out before that. You can start taking money as early as age 59 and a half without penalty. And there are even some strategies we can get it out without penalty prior to age 59 and a half. But 59 and a half is kind of the main, start point when you can start pulling money out of these IRAs. This just requires you to pull money out. Once you turn 73 now, you're going to be required to start taking that out and recognizing that as income.
Okay. Rex, how do you think this will affect your clients?
I think it'll affect, everybody. It'll affect everybody sooner or later. And so, those that are close, that are just hitting their 70s, they're surprised and excited to know that they don't have to start taking their mandatory distributions just yet, and they get a reprieve for a couple of years. And as financial planners, that gives us some ability to continue with some strategies of getting money out of the IRA accounts and into Roth IRA accounts, or out of the IRA accounts at lower tax brackets, to where we can get out a smaller amount than the minimum, and sometimes keep them in that lower tax bracket. So eventually everybody that lives beyond 73, it will impact as far as this rule. So
is there any way to maybe use this rule, or is this rule advantageous to everyone because you can keep it in your earning money for you longer? I mean, is that the biggest advantage to the investor?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage to the investor is that if you have money in retirement accounts and you're not needing it for your daily living, daily cash flow in retirement, so you're putting that off, then I think it gives you the ability of additional choices. It gives us an extra year right now from 72 to 73. So it's not a huge change here initially. It gives us an extra year to get one additional Roth conversion out, or one additional amount out at a lower tax bracket possibly. And then when they turn, in 2033, for those that are nearing age 73, it pushes it off an additional 2 years for 74 and 75. So, as an example, if we're converting, let's say, $40,000 a year from an IRA to a Roth IRA, then that allows us to get an additional 40 or up to 120,000 in that example into a Roth IRA before we have to start taking those mandatory distributions. So,
okay. Speaking of Roth IRAs, there are now changes to catch-up contributions. Who wants to handle that one?
Brandon does. I vote Brandon.
No, all right, Brandon. Talk to me about
that. Was Brandon Long, I think.
Well, yeah, I could start. I mean, I could read what was in the notes.
I can take it. So the catch-up contribution, we're talking about 401k specifically. There is a catch-up contribution on the IRA. And essentially what it is when you turn age 50, you're allowed to make what are called catch-up contributions. Now, it doesn't matter whether you need to catch up or not. It just comes down to, do you want to save more? Oftentimes people, when they're in their 50s and 60s, they're in the higher income earning years of their lives. And so the government allows them to save additional funds to prepare for retirement. So this year, right now, you can save $22,500. We're in 2023. You can save $22,500 per year into a 401k plan. If you are over age 50, they allow you to make a catch-up contribution of $7,500 additional into that. Now, as it stands today, all of that can be either Roth, so after tax, or pre-tax, and take a tax deduction on that. And that's the piece that's changing. That catch-up contribution will now be required to be Roth contributions if your income is above the threshold. And the threshold is $145,000. So if you made $145,000 the year before, then you're required to make that catch-up contribution in Roth. Now, we talked about earlier, does the government, is this better? Does it get more tax money or less tax money? This is one of those that they're essentially getting more tax money, right? Because if you're in those higher tax brackets and they're saying, okay, you can contribute, you can make this catch-up contribution. However, it's going to need to be made in Roth dollars, meaning you don't get a tax deduction. You can't push off that tax until you're in retirement in a lower tax bracket. It's effectively making you pay your taxes sooner.
And sorry, so what is all of this law now? So is this effective? Like if you turn 50 this year, how does that work?
Yeah. So the catch-up contribution, there's a couple pieces to this. The Roth piece takes effect next year in 2024. And they're also kind of increasing as well down the road how much that catch-up can be on the later ages, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. This year, though, it is not impacted. So this year you can do pre-tax or Roth no matter what your income was last year. However, at this point, we need to start planning for that and looking at where your income's at and what we're going to be able to do looking forward.
Okay. And as I'm assuming as financial planners, Rex, you guys run into people who want to catch up often, or is this, or what's the percentage of the people this may affect, do you think?
So it probably affects the upper, I don't know what the percentage is, right? But maybe the upper 10 to 15% of the population. It does, it will have that impact. I mean, not to reveal my age, but I just turned 50, right?
What?
And so I know.
Halfway to a Hyundai,
I know. It's a big year this year. And so for me, right, I can contribute that catch up of 7,500, like Brandon said. And essentially what that's going to do to me next year is I'll have to pay, because if I do that, it goes in as a Roth. And so essentially I don't get that, $2,500 in tax deductions that I was getting this year on that contribution. And so it forces me to pay those taxes on that money earlier. And typically during your highest earning years, which is why they're doing that, is typically from 50 to 65 or 50 to retirement, you're in your highest earning years, typically your highest tax bracket during your lifetime. And so that's why they're making that change, is to kind of force a bigger amount of taxes at the highest tax brackets that somebody's going to pay for those that are trying to save for retirement. So,
Rex, will you remind me and everyone listening is this sort of a bipartisan agreement on the Secure Act 2.0, or is this something that in the future, depending on what political party is in power and wants to change things, will adjust again?
So this had quite a bit of bipartisan support. There's a lot of negotiation. Again, 350 pages, right? And we're just talking about a small portion of the retirement piece of this Secure Act. And so there was some negotiating back and forth on little nuances, but it had pretty broad support all in all.
Okay. And
so I wouldn't anticipate this changing in the future as far as being reversed. It would be, I could see a time when they again increase, if people continue to live longer, if they increase that RMD age, or increase the amount of catch up, different things like that. But I don't see it getting reversed. So.
No, I'm just trying to determine, and the laws don't change as much as tax laws change, which is pretty much every year. But for the every person who maybe isn't working with a financial planner, that's the financial planner's job, is to stay up on this stuff. And so if that's something you don't want to have to mess with, that's why Rex and Brandon exist. And so if it changes often, make sure to contact your financial planner. You don't have to worry about that, which would be nice. So there's that plug, by the way. So allow 529 assets to be transferred to Roth IRAs beginning in 2024. So the 529 plans are changing. It says beginning in 2024, beneficiaries of 529 plans that have been in place for 15 years or more can transfer assets from the 529 plan to a Roth IRA. Well, that sounds good, Brandon. What are we doing there?
Yeah, this is a real win. The 529 plan has been, it's historically one of the better, ways to save for college for kids. You can contribute really large amounts into a 529. The real catch, though, with the 529 is if you don't use it for educational costs, and that can happen for a variety of reasons, right? Scholarships, kids decide not to go to a university and they do something else with their profession. There's a lot of things that can happen where all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're like, I've got all this money in a 529 plan and I don't need to spend it for college. What do I do? And in the past, you were left with very few options, right? We can take it out and take a penalty, or we can transfer it to another family member. But now we can, let's say we've got, an extra 10 grand sitting in a 529 plan and all the college expenses are paid. Well, now we can actually, after it's been sitting there for 15 years, we can convert that over to a Roth IRA for the beneficiary of the 529 plan.
Does it matter how much is left in there? Is there a balance?
Yep, there's a lifetime maximum limit of $35,000. So you can only do this with up to $35,000 one time, right? That's a cumulative amount for each person. But it allows you to effectively take, all right, we got this extra money left over from our 529. We put an extra, we can convert that to a Roth IRA for this child and let that grow, the rest of their lives. And so that's really beneficial. I guess the downside still with 529 is it's still not overly flexible. If you have a child who, they graduate and you want to help them out with a wedding or with other expenses, you still don't have that flexibility, and it might make sense to look at other options like a UTMA account, uniform transfer to minor account, or something else that has some more flexibility. Really, with education planning and gifting and things like that, there's quite a bit of strategy in it. But we wanted to highlight this on the 529 because this really is a great benefit, and solves a lot of the anguish of how do I plan for my child's education future and what happens if I save too much. This has a really good solution.
So if you save too much and you have more than the $35,000 and so you had 100 and then you spent money, but you still have like 45,000. So 35 you can transfer. What happens to the other 10? Does it fall into the old rules?
Yeah. So at that point, you can transfer that to another beneficiary. You can pull it out and pay a penalty on it. So we still got rules. But man, that 35,000 gives us a lot more breathing room.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm looking. Okay. It needs 15 years. It has to sit in there. So
yeah. So it has to sit for 15 years. And I think the reason they did that was, Roth IRAs have a certain amount of flexibility to them. And there's, the 5 year, there's a lot of different rules with the Roth IRA. And so this is essentially, in my opinion, kind of marking this to say, hey, this has got to be long-term assets. And we've got it's, in my opinion, trying to push this into a true retirement account for that child. Now, if you started the 529 early enough, maybe that flexibility re-enters the picture, but
okay.
Yeah.
I do think that over time, this is one of those provisions that the government will refine. This is a fairly new concept for the government as far as to allow the money to move from an education savings account over to a retirement account and maintain the tax-free status and tax-free growth on that asset. And so this is one of those provisions over the next 5 or 10 years. It wouldn't surprise me to see the lifetime limit increase. I'm not sure they're going to change the time frame because I think they do want to keep it as a long-term asset. But I would anticipate changes to this provision over a long period of time, probably.
Okay. Brandon, you have some more numbers?
Yeah, you bet.
All right.
So wanted to talk inflation for a minute. And inflation,
I haven't heard enough about that this year.
I know, but yet there seems to be a there's a central misunderstanding, right? I talk to people about inflation and when we talk about inflation coming down, right? According to Bespoke, right, it's actually, when you look at the numbers, it's come down over the last 9 months consecutively. And anytime a finance person says that, without fail, you're going to get eyes rolling. Like, oh yeah, I've been to the store lately. It's not coming down. and I think that the point I wanted to point out, and that hopefully will help all of our listeners make sense of what everyone's talking about. When we're talking about inflation coming down, we're talking about the rate at which inflation is increasing is coming down. And so you kind of target, right, where people would like to see inflation again, let's say is 2 to 3%. What that means is if we waved, and we're still sitting, up at about 5%, 5-6%. What that means is if we instantly next month saw this inflation come down to 2%, we're still going to be, that's 2% higher today than it was a year ago when it was 9% higher than the year before, right? Prices aren't, and there are some things where prices might come down a little bit, but in general, overall, the big basket that we measure inflation with, we anticipate Good news is when that's only increasing by 1, 2, 3% over the year before. And so it's I guess that's the overall bad news about inflation is we don't anticipate prices to revert back to where they were. But the good news is that the rate at which they're increasing is coming down. And that's really what the Fed is watching to make their decisions and how much pain they feel they need to inflict on our economy in order to bring that down.
So to get this straight, inflation, I think they want it to average around 2%. Like if you have a good inflation rate of 2%, or 2% inflation rate, then that's good. Is that correct?
That's the U.S. target, right? Is roughly a 2% inflation rate. And so that means that something that costs you $100 today, a year from now, it would cost you $102.
Okay. But don't get it twisted. When they say inflation's coming down, that doesn't mean things are necessarily getting cheaper. It just means the cost of goods aren't rising as fast as they used to, right, Brandon?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, and we were up around like what, 9%?
Yeah. Hit 9.1 in June of 2022.
That's far from 2%.
Yes.
Okay. Just to clarify.
I mean, so essentially what happened, right, is a $100 item went to 109 over the last 12 months. And then, from 21 to 22, and then from 22 to 23, it's gone up another 2%. If it was at 2%, then you go from 109 to 111. And for the math nerds out there, I know that I'm not doing, exactly 2% on those numbers, but that's how that builds. And so, people say that and they're like, well, it's still going up. And that would be, deflation if it was going down in price. If it was going from $110, for an item down to $100, that'd be a 10% deflation. And that brings an entirely new set of problems to an economy when you start having deflation or stagflation, which is a zero inflation, essentially. And so, the U.S. targets roughly 2%. China typically has been in an inflation rate of 5 to 7%. So different areas around the world all have their own targets as far as what kind of inflation they're targeting and they're shooting for. But
interesting.
And I think we forget how spoiled we are. The US dollar, it has been incredibly stable. I was up at Utah State and I went to a speech by I don't remember which country. It may have been Dominican Republic. It was one of those countries, a little bit smaller country, a little bit more developing. Anyway, he was bragging about, he had just mentioned during his presidency, they had really contained inflation. And then he quoted, it was about, I think it was 8 to 9% is where they had averaged. I was just like blown away. Like, that's contained, that's good. But we see those, and Russia, I mean, they've pre-COVID were experiencing really high inflation numbers. And so we see high inflation around the world. This little bout of inflation, though has been rough, is not new for most world citizens.
Okay, inflation's fun.
Way to keep that audience awake and alive, Brandon.
Yeah, well, inflation's tough because and that's a whole other subject which is not in the Secure Act, but what do you do? Because if incomes aren't keeping up with inflation, then you had a real problem. But that's a whole other subject.
So that's what we experienced over the last year, right? Is incomes weren't keeping up with inflation, and typically, who does that hurt the most? Typically it hurts the lower income earners the most, and so that's the issue, and that's why the Fed steps in and tries to keep get the inflation back down significantly, so that wages again can kind of keep up, and those on fixed incomes like Social Security and things like that, they get in extreme difficulty because typically the adjustments on their income are lagging the actual increase in goods and services. And so, that puts additional pressure on everybody that's on the fixed income or in kind of the, middle income and under income brackets. So,
well, then does the raising of the catch-up contributions for those 60 to 63, does that help you save more money so that you can have more money in retirement?
Man, that
If
was
you
a
have-
good transition.
If you have the money to
That's a
save.
good transition.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have the money to save. Yeah. Well, because you can see the disadvantages of, there's obviously advantages to living on a fixed income. You have a fixed income, and that's necessary for millions of people. The disadvantage is during periods of high inflation, and so ensuring you have enough money in retirement to sort of self-insure yourself against that was repeated a few times, but to where you have the cash would be nice, and if you need to catch up, you can a little bit now. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
Well, so I think what's fun about this, and I'll let you take over here in just a second, Brandon, but I think what's interesting about this is the government is essentially saying, okay, in 2024, we're going to, force your catch-up contributions to go in after tax. So we're going to force you to pay tax on any catch-up contributions that you want to put in. In 2025, we're going to increase how much you can pay more taxes on today to put into a Roth, as a catch-up contribution for a 3-year window. And where they came up with the 3-year window, who knows? I'm sure that was some sort of negotiation from somebody back there, but why that didn't go to age 65 or doesn't just go from 60 years of age on, just doesn't make a lot of logical sense out there. But I think it is interesting. The government's saying, yeah, you can pay taxes sooner and you can pay taxes on more money sooner too. We'll let you do that. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, you can pay all the taxes.
I will say, because I agree, Rex. I totally agree, and the humor is not lost on me. But it Roth, because we get this a lot. Higher income earners that are like, hey, where should I save? And oftentimes we'd rather do pre-tax, because what does pre-tax do? It defers the taxation, and if we can defer paying tax in their high income earning years, push that off until they're in retirement, no longer have a job and no longer have an income, a lot of times that can be highly beneficial. However, Roth contributions are not the end of the world, right? Because effectively we can put these in and it'll grow tax-free and be tax-free in retirement. I'm a huge fan of Roth, but I think the irony of all this, right, is that they're like, okay, now you can do Roth when you're in your highest levels of income, rather than maybe encouraging that when you're in your lower levels of income, and Roth usually makes a lot more sense.
Well, speaking of Roth, and normally with your job, you're talking 401k contributions, but what is this about Roth contributions through employers, Brandon?
Yeah, kind of. This one, for me anyway, came out of left field. Employer contributions or employer matches. So when I'm working in a job and I've got a 401k and I make my contribution, the employer agrees to match it. The employer match is always pre-tax. Whether I do Roth IRA or Roth 401k or traditional 401k, no matter what I decide on my taxes on my contribution, the employer match historically has always been traditional. They changed that to where now employers have the option to do Roth money as well. And this kind of gets back to this joke of like the government saying, okay, yeah, you guys can do more Roth, right? Because effectively that gets them the tax revenue up front rather than, at 72, 73, or 75. And so another funny twist. I'm not sure exactly how this will end up playing out. Obviously, it's effective immediately, so plans can do that. However, 401k plan, the boards need to meet together. They need to approve the changes. They need to amend the plan documents. They need to figure out what cost structure is like. But it effectively adds another option, right, for employers. If you want to do that matching contribution and make it Roth, then the employer has the option to do that. Obviously, there's going to be some adjustments to the cost of that and the way that's handled from a tax perspective, but that option is available. I will say prior to this, you could still do Roth with the employer match. You just had, if the plan allowed it, you just had to do the Roth conversion. And I've done that, right? Where I'll go in and I've gone back and switched my employer's contribution and converted that to Roth. I have to pay the taxes in the year that I do that, but it allows me to build up that Roth amount more. This just allows the employer to just directly contribute to Roth, which is kind of interesting. It wasn't even on my radar at all.
I think it'll be I think it'll be interesting. This will probably be one of the, in my opinion, one of the most underutilized provision of the Secure Act. Probably there's not a lot of incentive for a company to sit there and say, hey, I used to get this great tax deduction by helping out my employees. Oh, to heck with that tax deduction. I'm just going to put it in. I'm going to go ahead and pay the taxes because I want to.
No, that's going to be more of an employee perk. And so it's like, maybe if you really want to keep your employees, that's something that you do.
It could be that. I think it will be interesting as you try and read between the lines of what the government is thinking and things like that. But most people are aware that the profit sharing plan and the 401k plan was the beginning of the end for pension plans, right? And it'll be interesting to see if the government continues to kind of push this and pursue this, if over time the government starts moving all company contributions and requiring all company contributions to be Roth contributions, thus forcing the companies to pay taxes on those contributions into 401k plans. Now, that's not there yet, but I could see the government going that direction more and more over the next decade or two, as the government tries to find additional tax revenues, either to spend more or to pay down the national debt, is concerned. And then it'll be interesting to see, if there's not a tax deduction, we'll learn very quickly which companies are truly doing it for the benefit of the employees and which companies are doing it, for the tax deduction for the benefit of the owners. That'll become very apparent quickly. So.
Sure, but that messes with this 6th point that we have on here, which requires auto enrollment of new 401k plans.
Yeah, so kind of a fun new provision twist, right? I've been doing 401k plans for years and years and years, and especially when I started, I'd get up, right, and I'd have my dance, and be like, you guys, look how amazing saving into retirement accounts is. Look at what your funds can grow. We can set this up automatically. You get tax benefits. We can grow. We can have great management. This is your key to jumping into investment, low cost. I mean, all these things, and I think, everyone's like, yes, Brandon, we're excited for it. And they're like, who wants to sign up? And, half of them would,
What's going on?
and I think, and people would come up, right, and be like, no, this is so good, so excited. Money's just really tight right now. I'll do it next year, and I heard that over and over and over and over again. And oftentimes from the same people. And so people just wouldn't, because, that money's tight. It's an extra form to fill out, all that stuff. Well, plans have started doing, not all of them, but some have started doing automatic enrollment, where, you get a notification that says, hey, you're going to be enrolled in the 401k plan. We're going to start you at 3%. If you don't want to do that, let us know. We'll take you off the plan. And it's amazing that simple change the difference, because most times people don't even recognize, a small percentage on their check, and it's going to a good cause, right? It's going to the future. People look at it and be like, I can get by. I'm not going to worry about trying to find a form to stop it, right? And it does just the opposite. And so we see much higher participation rates in plans that have the automatic enrollment. And so, I mean, we've got plenty of employers that choose that. The downside for an employer, though, is that all of a sudden you get more employees participating. So that's more matching, that's more administration. And so, if you've got an employer that's doing automatic enrollment, they're likely doing that because they really care about you. But now they're going to be forced to. Old plans are grandfathered. So if you've got an old plan, it doesn't change. And if you want to start a 401k, you want that option, but you're worried about the cost of an automatic enrollment provision. If you get your 401k plan started before December 31st of 2024, so you've got about a year and a half from now, but December 31st, 2024, then you can start your plan, not have that automatic provision, add it later if you want to.
Mm-hmm. I really like watching new employees or first-time workers get their first check. And then they've done the math, they know they make $10, $15 an hour or whatever. and then they're like, where's all my money? And what is FICA? Like, what is this? And so if it's just a line item that says 401k or whatever, and it comes out of their first check, that is what it is. And then they're used to it from day one, and they won't even bat an eye, maybe, Rex.
Yeah, one of my favorites, the problems that this solves, is for those employees that think they're extremely smart, and they probably are really smart in their own fields, but they put down how much they want to save for the entire year. So I want to save, $5,000 for the year. And they put that down as their enrollment amount, and their first check is gone because it's per period, not per year.
Yeah.
And so we just took their whole check, and then we have to back it out, and it's a mess and everything else. And so this kind of solves that, right? Because now it's just percentage based, and it's automatically enrolled, and they can obviously go online and change it. And we are finding that people do that, right? But when you match an auto enrollment with an automatic increase, so you're starting them at 3 or 5 or 6%, whatever that amount is, and then you auto increase that by 1% a year until they get up to 10% or 15%. People are great, right? They almost always take the path of least resistance, which is doing nothing, right? And so if it's automatically done for them, and it's increasing automatically every single year by a small percentage, then they'll take that. And this should help people save significantly more money over time for their retirement. And I think that this will, all things being equal, be a great benefit for people. So
yeah, I'm kind of a don't tell me what to do with my life sort of guy. But this is one of those that'll benefit you, it's like, especially when you're young and you get your first job and you just don't know what's going on. And then you work for 2 or 3 years and you see the savings start adding up in your 401k, and you see it start making money, and you're like, okay, I didn't miss it, and now you see the power of it. But making that first decision, unless you have good parents or a good somebody in sometimes it's someone who you work with is like, hey, it's a really good idea, you should jump in on this 401k. Unless you have someone helping you make that decision, a lot of people, I guess, don't, right, Brandon? Was what you said. It's hard to get them to jump, even though you did the whole rah scene. So this will automatically enrolls them into a 401k, and they have to opt out, correct?
Right. Yep,
okay.
Exactly. And they'll get a notice, right? It says, hey, you've been joined to the 401k, and usually lots of times we see this start at 3%. And that's actually, so the rule effective December 31st, 2024, any plan starting after that, they need to automatically enroll between 3%, but not more than 10%. So between 3 and 10. 10%, I think, would shock a system, right? You're just like, oh my gosh, what happened? But yeah, 3 to 10, and then each year thereafter it needs to increase by 1% until it at least reaches 10%, but you can go up to 15%. And those are really, just sound ideas. If you don't like it, then you can write in and opt out of saving. But
opt out of saving. Is that a hashtag we should get trending? Opt out of saving.
Yeah. Live today. Hashtag opt out.
Rex is like, that is not good for business.
No. I'm like, over here. Cut.
Rex, this bill is 300 something pages long. So we hit some like 6 basic things. Is there anything else you want to touch on the Secure Act, or people just need to get a hold of planwithbaxter.com to ask questions?
I think get a hold of planwithbaxter.com. There's, if you are a business owner, they did increase some incentives for starting up a 401k plan or a retirement plan. And so there's some additional incentives and, tax incentives and credits and things like that. And so if you're looking at starting one up, now is a great time to do it before, like you said, Brandon, is you like to be able to make the decision for yourself instead of being forced. And so if you do it now or during the next year and a half, then you get that flexibility to make that choice. If you wait until after that, then the government's going to, hold your hand fairly firmly and say, this is your choice.
Yep.
And so I would say get a hold of us, planwithbaxter.com. Rex and Brandon here. And so we'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, you guys. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.